everyone else answer. One of the challenges that we've had, so we all collectively working to try to fight this opioid epidemic, is that there are so many different layers to this problem. And if I can tick down just a few of them, I won't even go into it. Each one of these, I could spend an hour talking about the underlying issues and challenges and funding and problems and legalities. But we have people who make the opioids, manufacturers, to begin with, and there's all sorts of questions. We're suing, the state of Utah is one of the large manufacturers for what we believe was a fraud that was perpetrated on the medical community and the community at large about the addictive nature of opioids. Again, could talk about that for a long time, but that's one critical issue, but not the only one. There are those who take those and distribute them, other commercial entities, out to physicians. And there are those physicians who write the prescriptions, and they come under a lot of scrutiny, and I think in some cases, some unfair criticism, in other cases, very fair criticism, because like in any profession, you have some folks who are going to abuse the system. And certainly docs were part of the problem, still are part of the problem, but the medical community is waking up to this problem, being much more responsible. Then you have the folks who fill the prescriptions, pharmacies that are part of this chain, continuum of concern. Us, the public, the patients, and how we prioritize pain relief and what we demand in terms of our own care and how we challenge medical plans. All of those are a piece of it. There's education, there's law enforcement, which I'll let Agent Besser talk about because he and I work hand in hand on the investigation and prosecution side. And then what Alema will talk about a lot, the probably the most important part, the long-term care, treatment, recovery. And I again apologize. I didn't mean to offend him in any way, but he made a very important point. I think I was saying we were surprised in the past to hear that he was an addict, and still is. You never get over that. It's a lifelong challenge, but you can recover and be in a particularly good place. And if any of you out there, this is another plea, are addicts, but you're in a good place, you have an important role to play, because like Alema or Court McGee, our UFC superstar from Utah, who was dead. He died of a drug overdose in the streets, and God gave him a chance to come back. He's still an addict, even though he's a world-class athlete. He still fights every day, and that'll be a fight for his whole life. But he can touch people in a way, Alema can relate to people in a way that many of us can't, or at least those who are in the cycle of addiction can relate to them more than people like me. And so I would encourage you, if you have had those challenges, to come forward and use your voice like Alema has, to reach out and lift other people up. If you can see all of those different areas, and naloxone fits into the life-saving or the emergency care. We have people who make movies to educate, like Jenny McKenzie, Dying in Vain. We have to address each of those issues holistically, together, not all in separate little compartments trying to work on it, or we'll never be successful. And I believe that the reason we have seen a decrease in the rate of deaths here in Utah is because we have figured out in our state how to connect better and bring all these resources together and address these challenges together. And I'll leave it at that.
And Brian, while I worked for the Salt Lake City Police Department, we had a series of bank robberies, and you could tell the pattern of that particular robber by how often they hit, and it was their fix that they were hitting for.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's a sidebar before I address that. I just want to encourage you guys, if you have questions, this is the panel to ask. I mean, down in the dirt, nitty-gritty, in the weeds questions, please ask, because we're willing to take those. I just want to admonish you on one thing. Like the Attorney General said, we silo things, and and I'm gonna address that, because I really believe that is the success that we're talking about here stems from that parochial problem. You guys own this problem. We all do. What we do is we look over there and say, you know what? Bill and Sue next door have a kid that's struggling with this. That's their problem. It's not their problem. It's our problem, collectively, because in a few years, some of you young people will get married. And you may have a spouse that struggles with this problem. You may have a child that ends up struggling with this problem. You may be in church on Sunday and realize that the person sitting next to you is struggling with this problem. And I can go on and on and on with anecdotal examples of why you need to own this, but you didn't. This is our problem collectively as a society, as a community. Until we change that and we quit pointing the finger and say it's their problem, we're going to continue to have the problem. And so I just admonish you that we have to own this. That's why it goes back to my previous statement that this room should be full. Why are we succeeding in Utah? Exactly what was mentioned. I would have never thought as a young agent 25 years ago that I would be seated next to a doctor and a politician talking about this problem. But law enforcement is now breaking out of the idea of merely enforcing, and now we're educating and we're empowering and we're joining hands. The fact that I get to sit next to treatment and prevention providers like Alema, rock star in this particular arena, and Jen, it just blows me away with what she's been able to do with the personal issues that she's had to deal with throughout her life, and literally made lemonade out of lemons. And Utah naloxone is, in my opinion, a cutting-edge program. I've never seen anything like it. Attorney General, I'm dealing with politicians here in Utah who think outside the box. They think in an innovative way. And really, going back to what he said, it's this idea of breaking out of these personal silos, these professional silos, and attacking the problem in a peripheral and in a 360 manner. And I'm thankful for that. All of us now are literally working outside of those silos to collectively deal with this. You know, getting back to your statement, it's interesting. I remember dealing in the early 90s, late 80s with the methamphetamine epidemic when it swept across the United States. I remember interviewing a guy that I had arrested for manufacturing methamphetamine. And he cut me off during the interview and he said, hey, we get on with this? He goes, I haven't eaten or slept in over 25 days. And he goes, I'm locked up now, I can't get my meth, and I'm gonna crash. And I said, okay. And we got on with the interview. And meth really scared me. It did. Out of all the drugs I've dealt with, methamphetamine was very volatile. And then all of a sudden we hit the opioid crisis. That scares me more because it is harder for me to spot. And so getting back to those patterns you were saying, you don't see that in the opioid epidemic. The opioid epidemic, the heroin and opioid epidemic, literally crosses all socioeconomic boundaries. I'm dealing with businessmen. I'm dealing with individuals in law enforcement who are struggling with this. It literally knows no parameters. So I just wanted to encourage you with that. Did you have a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Please, speak up. We're happy to break and take questions.
So, in terms of prescription drugs, what if pharmacies gave out smaller doses, like just enough for the day for the more addictive drugs?
Well, I can tell you this, we are aggressively working on that right now, not only from a policy standpoint, but with our healthcare industries, and Dr. Plum will be, she'll give you a phenomenal answer on that. We are aggressively working on that.
So when you look at opiates or opioids being prescribed, pretty much in 7 days, people can start to develop a physical dependence on them. So your body, if you take it every day, as prescribed by your doctor for 7 days, sometimes, it depends on the person, but as little as 7 days, you can start to have this dependence on it, which means that then day 8 comes and you don't have it, and your body feels this withdrawal. Like, I need that in my system. There's a receptor in your brain that needs it there. So for me, I think a big piece of that is talking with, and all of us as individual community members, talking with our families, talking with our prescribers. I haven't had an opioid substance since I had my son, 15 years ago. And at the time when they prescribed the medication to me, they just sent me home with the ball, right? There was no discussion about this could be addictive or dependence created, creating. This could be something that you could overdose on, even taking it as directed.
And Janet was probably a full bottle.
It was a full bottle, absolutely a full bottle of pills, 60 pills. This is something that any children in your home could get a hold of, and it could cause an overdose in them. None of this was discussed, and we're starting to get better in medicine, but we are not there. I will guarantee you we're not there. And so I encourage each individual, if someone is going to prescribe this to you or to someone in your family, that you ask them, do you really think I need this substance? I've heard ibuprofen is just as good for bone fracture pain. Do you think that would be a better option for me? No? Okay. I've also heard physical therapy, occupational therapy, acupuncture, acupressure, mindfulness are good strategies that are just as effective in some circumstances as opiates. Do you think that would be a strategy? Okay, no, you still think I need it? My brother died of a heroin overdose. Do you really think that I should take that risk? Do you feel comfortable putting that risk in my world? Okay, you still think I should have it? All right, what's your plan to get me off of this substance in 5 days? I don't want this for any more than 5 days. We as community members are going to have to start taking that lead because it's far too easy in medicine. I can sign a prescription in less than 15 seconds, right? It's far too easy for a physician to just do a prescription than it is to talk about these other issues. 45 minutes of talking about why your life is painful in ways that maybe aren't physical pain. So if a doctor writes a prescription, say I write you a prescription for 30 Percocets, 15s, and you go to the pharmacy to fill them, the pharmacist actually has an obligation to fill that prescription as it is written because it was a doctor's order. There are some major gaps there, right? What if you as an individual say, you know, I think maybe I'd like to have 5 of these just in case the next 24 hours are rough. Well, the doctor wrote me a prescription for you for 30, so you have to take 30. I don't want 30. Well, sir, I have to fill, you see what I mean? There's a whole lot of issues and gaps in there that need to be addressed because I think you're onto something there. What if there were a way for us as individual society members, as pharmacists, then to kind of go back against what's become the status quo? We have a friend, my colleague Peter Seller and I have a friend that their teenager just got their tonsils out and they sent them home with 60 Percocets after they got their tonsils out. What? Seriously, what is that about? I get that you may think a couple of pills would be necessary. I personally don't write opioids, period, outside of the actual acute ER setting. I don't write them, so I don't understand that. But there's a global education piece that needs to come together because our prescribing patterns are still up, unfortunately. It takes a long time. I think that the decrease in deaths between 2016 and 2017 is a huge, it's societal shift. It's more people being willing to talk about this. There's definitely having naloxone available has kept people alive that perhaps would not have been. We know of over 2,500 times that community members have used these kits to save a life in the last 3 years. So it's not solely that, but it's also that people have been willing to talk about this enough that families are willing to go get a naloxone kit that they wouldn't have been willing to before, or active users. So it's going to take this big shift and frankly a pushback because the pharmaceutical companies have for a long time had their way with us as a society. And if they say you need this pill, you start to feel like you're not being taken care of well if you don't get that pill, whether that's a pill for your restless legs or your little blue pill that you need to sit in the tubs and hold the hands of your love out on the end of a cliff, or if it's a pain pill. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies have completely snowed us as a society, as medical providers. And we've got to take that back. We've got to take that power back.
General Reyes, I can tell you one.
A couple, well, yes, because it was an excellent question, and I had a couple of thoughts, because I want to give some credit to industries that have stepped up to try to be proactive in addressing what you talked about. And your question was it was about the prescriptions that were being written by physicians, but also about the pharmacies filling those prescriptions. I can't remember now.
Come back every day to get it.
But so, as a group of state attorneys general, 5 years ago, we sat down with. I'm not talking about the pharmaceutical companies that make the drugs. I'm talking about the pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens that fill the prescriptions. We asked them, if we can help you get those waivers, legally secure you from, immunize you, would you be willing to reduce the amount that you fill? So even if it was a 30-day Percocet prescription, you would fill only up to 3 days or 5 days. And at first they said, why would we do that? Like, why would we limit our own revenues? We're not required to. There's no mandate, there's no law. But over time, and this is where I want to give them credit, I think they saw what was happening. They have many of them been responsible, and you've seen earlier this year some of the biggest pharmacies push each other, challenge each other, and step up and say, we are now only going to fill a certain number of days. It doesn't matter if you have a 30 or 60-day prescription for your tonsils, you get 3 days, and then you're going to have to come back. You have to go back and see the physician and come back. That's a very proactive, responsible step by an industry that's not required to do that, but we're going to need every industry to step up and take those kinds of measures. They're also looking at electronic scripts, which will help mitigate some of the fraudulent prescription abuse. But the other point I wanted to make is that Jen is rightfully harsh on some of her medical colleagues because there are abusers there. But also, again, I think it's too easy to just point the finger at docs and say, yeah, you guys are bad because you write too many prescriptions. Most of that is a reflection of what we demand as a society. And I think we have to take responsibility for our own health and lives again, as I mentioned before, and look, for instance, for alternatives. And we've been pressing insurance companies to fund those alternatives so that you don't have to get opioids. And you can go and get even homeopathic pain relief. But right now it's too hard to get that because insurance companies won't pay for it. So we're having the same conversations with insurance companies that we were having with pharmacies a few years back. The docs have done a pretty good job here in Utah. IHC and Regents have both, they challenged their physicians to write 25% fewer opioid prescriptions over a certain amount of time, and they're hitting those milestones. So kudos to them, that's good. But I think we have to also own this, as Brian said before, and be careful, because all it takes is a bunch of patients who keep suing doctors who won't give them the drugs that they want, or writing bad reviews and saying, my doc didn't give me what I want. Those types of things keep incentivizing doctors to say, well, okay, if that's the demand, well, then we'll continue to write prescriptions. So there's a lot of responsibility that goes all the way around.
Okay, Alema, we are coming up on 1 o'clock, about 7 minutes away. I don't know if anybody has class they need to be aware of. Question right here.
Sorry, just as a student health advocate here on campus, how could we be better about approaching the antecedents of this issue and talking about it in a non-intimidating way so that it's an open conversation on campus?
Alema.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly address just something that the Attorney General was mentioning and that Jen and Agent Besser talked about, and
Yep.
I would love to speak on that. Quickly, there is a twofold part here. We're talking about the supply and the demand, right? And so we're all familiar with the economic model that is being presented here. And if we could, do something with the demand and the supply, would be affected. And I look back, as Jen was talking about, tonsils out 60 Percocet. Are you kidding me? What we understand today is that's completely inappropriate for the medical need. And I think when we receive that information from the doctor, which is the expert, that you had this procedure, you need 60 pills, and then I'm assuming that that's appropriate when it's not. The education is to the point now where we understand that the proper prescribing protocol would be 2 days, 3 days of pain medication, not 60 pills. So understanding that, I can speak also from the side of a person that was at a pain clinic as a patient demanding OxyContin. And when my pain doctor, would propose alternative solutions to my pain, I was like, no, write me my prescription and I'll get out of here, right? Don't talk to me about these alternative things. I can tell you from my perspective today, as someone who is in recovery that does not touch opiates, right? Or if I do in a surgery situation, there's a strict protocol that is employed for me so that I don't stay on them outside of the hospital. Okay, but now with that background, I'm open to the homeopathic, holistic healing, options that are available, whether it be mindfulness or yoga or meditation or acupuncture. And I can tell you, as a person who's pursued those now in my recovery, those things do work for pain management and pain treatment. Now back to your question about how do we open this discussion, this is part of it. I'm part of personally sharing my story, my experiences, is in a hope that we can have that conversation without it being shame-based and this idea that, if it happened in your family, don't put that in the obituary. We see more and more now obituaries where people are willing to say that my loved one passed away as a result of the disease of addiction. We are dealing with a disease, right? And it is chronic, it is progressive, it is fatal. Without treatment, it will kill. And similar to what Jen had mentioned before, just like any other disease, there's high probability, really, that there will be relapse. And that may be, come back because of the choice somebody makes, or it just may come back. And in other diseases, we do not shame that person. But in addiction, we do. So we start to have these conversations. I, as a clinician, when I have a client that relapses, my response is, right, yeah. Well, what are you doing for your treatment, right? And heaven forbid, but if it were to happen, and it's very probable, I hope that I will continue to do things that will make that not happen, or help that not happen in my life. If I were to relapse and go back out and use again, my hope is that I will have the courage to avoid the shaming, the typical, route would be to go underground and not tell anybody, right? As opposed to, let me be forthright about this and tell somebody close to me, like, man, my disease is back. Let me get some aggressive treatment, right? And that there's no shame in that, zero, okay? And that we can address it from that standpoint.
Can I give a direct answer to your question as well?
Yeah.
There's one person at this table that someone that's struggling with addiction will go to. It's not me, I'm the boogeyman. It's not Sean. Maybe doctor. The person they're gonna go talk to is Leno. The power of peer advocacy is huge. And people are always comfortable when there's power in numbers. And any place I've gone across the state of Utah right now that's had success in this, it's where the people are coming together in a number, in a peer support group, dealing with it, saying, hey, just tell me your story. Because all of a sudden, a person hears what Alema says, and they're like, geez, look at this guy. I mean, he struggled with this, he's squared away, he's got it together, he's on this road to recovery, he's got a winsome message that is powerful to me. I want to talk to him. And then all of a sudden, it emboldens the person that's quietly dying inside to say, I think I can do this. But there has to be peer advocacy, there has to be peer support. It will die without it. I'm convinced of that. It may be a myopic viewpoint, but any successful program on a campus has to start with people who have been in the trenches and struggled with it, and then have come out the other side through that tunnel of light. And people like Dilemma are the ones that actually make that happen.
Question right here.
Okay, to follow on that one, I would like to know two things. One, do you have any programs for doing peer-to-peer advocacy that have been developed for implementation at the higher education level? Because we're the biggest community college in the West. 60,000+ people. We have a School of Arts and Media, and I'm sure some of you have been over there. I'm on radio SLCC. I listen all the time to all of the messages that we get. We get the public service announcements, but we want to move towards the student being his own advocate, peer-to-peer, friend-to-friend, person-to-person. And usually that comes with some kind of promotional program, healthcare promotion program that's structured, endorsed from the top down, and implemented community-wide. And what most people don't know is that we have a continuous education program here, and we cover more subjects than anybody. And this is one where I see could fit there, but I don't see anything that fits. So I was wondering, is there any effort towards putting together something like that?
Well, and I know that this kind of peer support, peer recovery coach, peer kind of warm handoff concept has been very